This is the Open Floor NBA podcast where we talk about the league and all the big stories going on in it. Joining me this week, fresh off our weekend in the desert, we watched two exhilarating Lakers exhibition games. Mark Medina, Sporting Tribune, Sportskeeda. And Mark, you're still there, right? Like you decided not to drive back to the Los Angeles area after the game on Sunday night, correct?
That is correct. I mean, look, Chris, when you're witnessing this historical moment with LeBron and Bronny James making their NBA debut together, you got to put in the work and stay up late.
Yes. I'm actually, we're going to get into that. I'm actually a bit surprised that they played together in an exhibition game. I kind of thought going in that JJ Redick would save that moment for a real game, right? Like at home. And look, it'll still be meaningful because the exhibition season doesn't count for anything. And when they finally do step on the floor in a regular season game, it'll be the first time father and son step on the floor. But I was a little bit surprised to see the start of that second quarter, to see JJ Redick put them both out there. Were you?
I was really torn and on the fence. Part of me thought that they wanted to save the moment because the Lakers like to, make the most of attention. It's one of their Hollywood ways of doing things. Of wait until they're at crypto.com, to your point. Wait for a regular season game where the moment means a lot more. But JJ Redick, stressed that he wasn't going to try to do anything gimmicky. It's going to be within the flow of the game. Now, before the game, he left it open-ended whether he was going to do it or not. But Bronny shared afterwards that JJ gave him and LeBron a heads up that we're going to play the second quarter and go from there. So part of me thinks that even if we might see this moment before Bronny goes down to the G League for most of the season, that this is a way to kind of get most of it out of the way, that, any consequence of playing them together because of Bronny's learning curve with adapting to the NBA would be mitigated because it's in a preseason game.
So do you think that's the future for Bronny, playing most of this next season in the G League? Because what we saw for the first couple of exhibition games was not good. And look, they are exhibition games. He did just turn 20 years old. He is coming off a calendar year that was traumatic, to say the least, with the heart issue that he had last summer, to, ramping up to play in these games for USC, to going through the draft process. He does belong, I think, in the G League full time, because the player I saw for the first couple of games, he's got a long way to go, man. Played 13 minutes in that game Sunday night, no points, was a minus 16 overall. Wasn't that much better in the opener, only had that bucket at the end of the game against Minnesota. I'm still wondering what Bronny James is right now, because he's clearly not a point guard yet. He's not comfortable with the ball in his hands in those situations. He's not a shooter. He does have some defensive skills, and JJ's brought that up a couple of times. It's something that scouts talk about when talking about the pluses of Bronny James, but he's still, there's a lot of work to be done if he's going to turn into an NBA player. And I know you posted about how people are telling you that there is the potential for him to be a long-term rotation player.
And let me clarify this part here. Okay. So,
please do.
Well, to answer your part about, is he going to spend most of the time in the G League? Yes. I mean, as we saw in Summer League, in preseason game, his shot needs a lot of work. His ball handling needs a lot of work. I mean, I think it was very telling, literally, first play of the game against Minnesota, turnover. Now, the plus side that the Lakers will talk about, what JJ Redick will talk about, is how he reacted there, where his defense is good, his effort's there, good attitude. As soon as he turned the ball over, he raced down to get a block. But I think in telling fashion, he still didn't retrieve the ball because Minnesota was able to get a putback. So You're looking at where like his short-term lane could be. It's going to be more defensively. Now, I know that you had some reaction. There was some reaction elsewhere about what I was saying on Fox Sports Radio Friday night, that one GM told me there is a pathway for him to be a role player long-term. It was someone to be on a 15-man roster, not part of regular season rotation, 5 through 9 player off the bench. And the point that he was
making, but role player implies part of the rotation, right? Like if I don't consider, I'm trying to think of an example, but I don't consider the 12th to 15th man a role player, right? Like I think they're just there. They're practice filler is what they are. Like role player implies you're good enough to be in somebody's top 8. And there's a long way to go to even think about Bronny in those terms.
Well, I think this is where we got mixed in some semantics because the GM he was saying role player as part of a regular season roster, and so his point was that when you're evaluating guys at the end of the rotation, look, in the NBA you have to be fit to play in the NBA, but a lot of value that they're having with these players is, are they good practice guys? Their work ethic's good. They won't complain. To Bronny's credit, he hasn't shown any sense of entitlement especially because of his connection with
not
his
at
dad.
all.
But to what your point is and to what I'm saying, he doesn't have a defined skill set. There is, I think, some pathway that he could develop into having a defined skill set, but it's going to take a lot of time, and most of it's going to start in the G League.
Yeah, and he's got to be a point guard. Like, I hear all these Davon Mitchell comparisons, and okay, but like there's one Davon Mitchell. Most of the guys that are 6'1", 6'2", with that frame don't wind up playing NBA basketball. If you're that frame, you've got to be a playmaker. And watching some of his minutes, like he was bringing the ball up for stretches. He was trying to get the team into the offense. He's got to get more comfortable with that. If he's not comfortable doing that, he's not going to last long in today's NBA. I do think over the years, as he gets a little bit older, naturally stronger, he is going to become a better and better defensive player. But if you don't have a defined offensive skill set, then you're not going to last long in the NBA, regardless of who you are and what kind of connection that you have. But I think it is good that like he needs to be in the G League. He needs to be in the weight room. He needs to be working with specific coaches on specific skills with no pressure whatsoever. That's the G League. That's playing for, what do they even call the Laker G League team? I don't even know.
South Bay Lakers.
South Bay Lakers. That's right. But they play. Yeah, they only play. They play in the UCLA practice facility. So I don't know what they are. But he needs to be playing for that team and playing extended minutes and just learning on the fly, not worrying about the results, just worrying about the process, to borrow a favorite NBA phrase. So hopefully that's the case for Bronny. Hopefully he's not in that Laker locker room too often. He doesn't need that pressure. He needs to be playing basketball and playing lengthy minutes and learning NBA skills. Let's talk about the Lakers, though, as a whole. They lost their first two exhibition games. Who cares? Like, by the end of these games, you're looking at back end of the bench guys that are playing. The Lakers are clearly focused on becoming a better three-point shooting team. That's obviously a priority for them. They were bottom third in the NBA in three-point attempts last season. JJ Redick has made a big production out of getting better with the three. The corner three, Mark, seems to be what they're targeting a lot. Like when I watch these first two exhibition games, a lot of dribble drive, a lot of corner threes, good looks at times. Sometimes they get a little off kilter. I saw one sequence in the first quarter with LeBron when he went to the basket. He thought Austin Reeves was going to be standing in the far corner. He wasn't there. There was some interaction between the two of them. But they want more corner threes. I get that. The problem is, like, sometimes it's felt like some of these guys are just chucking threes for the sake of chucking threes, right? Like DAngelo Russell did that a lot in the first game. Like he forced several three-point shots. Those aren't good shots. Those aren't the shots that the Lakers are going to make them a successful team. So you've been around the Lakers all throughout training camp, first couple of games. What is JJ Redick's philosophy on this? Beyond just shooting threes, how does this team improve from the team they were last year?
Yeah, well, starting with the three-point shot, I mean, obviously, it's going to be evaluated in how many attempts. And to your point, ranking bottom third of the league, they're 27th last season with about 31 attempts. When you look at the Suns game, they had 40. But one of the things that JJ Redick stressed was it's not about hitting a specific number, which he hasn't shared, at least publicly. It's about better ball movement, getting quality looks. And so you mentioned DAngelo Russell. He can be a good three-point shooter, but it depends how does it come within the context of the offense. I remember one shot in particular against Phoenix that you referenced, pull up. He didn't really have balance. He was just chucking it. He thought he was doing a heat check.
He did it against Minnesota a couple of times too. Like he just was pulling up with 18 seconds left on the shot clock. That is not the kind of three-point attempt that's going to win you games.
Yeah, so I think generally he wants the increased threes to be a product of a lot of good ball movement, a lot better spacing. DAngelo can be a part of that. Same thing with Austin Reeves, a little bit more with Rui Hachimura, even Anthony Davis. Even though JJ Redick's talking about Anthony Davis shooting threes, I think it's not going to be one of these things that all of a sudden he's a stretch five. It's more of just increasing some of the attempts, relatively speaking, because he doesn't usually shoot a lot of threes.
Yeah, took three in that game, in his first game. Took three. They made the first one.
There are some driving kicks that were LeBron's looking for him there. I think the other thing that he's talking about having LeBron do that. And I think part of that is also preserving his usage rate, because LeBron, he's going to be 40 December 30th. He's in his 22nd season. He's very good at driving to the basket, but you're getting a lot of, contact as a result of that. So I think that is part of the thinking there. And then I think the other part is the fact that Gabe Vincent, he's fully healthy. He expects that there's not going to be any other lingering issues after he had his surgery with his knee last season. There's reason to think that because he played 68 games the previous 2 seasons in Miami. He's a pretty good 3-point shooter, but the other thing is he's known as a really good perimeter defender, and that can do 2 things: shield some of the weaknesses that DAngelo and Austin Reeves have defensively, but also allow them to really tap into what they do offensively. But look, Chris, when we're talking about the Lakers, what their ceiling is, it starts and ends with, can LeBron James and Anthony Davis keep this sustained good run of health and play from last season, Team USA, and also improving from within with their existing roster. And there's a pathway to do that because of better health. JJ's, I think even with his inexperience, signs that he can make some good in-game adjustments. But what does that leave? I think a competitive playoff team that is either going through the first round, likely as a play-in, and that's it.
I'll need to see a little more than a couple of games to be drinking the JJ Kool-Aid there, Mark. I got to tell you, I'm like that was he seems fine. Like my first takeaway from watching the first quarter, first half of the first 2 games is that there is more of an emphasis on that ball movement. There is more of an emphasis on player movement, right? Like especially in that Minnesota game, I thought there was a lot of movement for a lot of guys out there on the floor. It was something you didn't see a lot of last year with the Lakers. But if you go to the second game, when you have LeBron out there, there's a little bit less movement. He's more ball dominant. Same thing with AD out there on the floor. You're running your offense through these guys. So it'll be interesting to see if he can blend those 2 things together to make a more diverse offense, a more fluid offense that they're going to need to be successful. Look, they are bullish on Gabe Vincent. I think they're right to be. Gabe Vincent is going to be an asset for them off the bench. 2-way player, just 2 years removed from playing in the finals with Miami. They got virtually nothing from him last year. That'll be a bounce. I think Jared Vanderbilt, they're counting on as well. Whenever he comes back, that'll give them a good bounce. Look, after the first game, I was bullish on Dalton Connect. I was watching him play. I'm like, wow, the fluidity, the shot, the offense. Then you see game 2 when he can't hit the side of a barn, right? He's 1 for 7 from 3-point range. I think he finished -19, -20 or something overall in that game. So he's definitely going to be a work in progress, especially defensively, because he's going to have to prove he can stay out there on the floor. I just think they to me, they can't be better than, they're not going to be better than what they were last year. I don't see any market improvements that takes them from like a 48 win team to a 54-55 win team. Because even if you get a bounce from Vincent and from Vanderbilt, like, can you count on the same kind of consistency from LeBron and AD? They were great last year. Like, they were healthy for most of the season. They were all NBA players. Like, can you expect that again? That might be asking a lot with LeBron approaching 40 and Anthony Davis, even though he pushed aside the injury issues from last year, he's still someone with a history of them. So I watched these first 2 games. I'm like, look, they're going to be good, but I still look at them somewhere in that 7 to 10 range in the Western Conference.
Yeah, and I think whether you're looking through this through a concerned lens of glasses or the Lakers, purple and gold tinted glasses, I think that the end result is the same, that their ceiling, barring, a major move that they make before the trade deadline, is playing tournament first round and making it competitive, and then that's it. I
I
think
don't even know what the move would be, Mark.
yeah,
And I feel the same way, and we're not going to get into this today, but I feel the same way about the Warriors, the same way about the Clippers. Some of these like veteran, star-laden teams that are not built like the modern teams, like that are just that haven't been together over a long period of time and grown up. Like the Warriors have, but they're just on the older side. And I don't know what you can get from Kuminga and from Moody, but that's a conversation for another day. I just don't know if there's a mid-season deal that makes the Lakers markedly better. Like, does Trae Young at mid-season make the Lakers markedly better? I don't know if there's an answer to that question.
yeah. Well, I think the answer obviously was there in the offseason where I think continuity. The Lakers talk about how they chose continuity because of just how other teams are relying on that. But I think it was really that continuity chose them. There wasn't a market to make a deal, and even if there were hypotheticals with Klay Thompson, DeMar DeRozan, one, I don't think either Chicago or Golden State had interest in what the Lakers had to offer, and secondly, I think the Lakers came to the conclusion that even if they had interest in that they would be a worse team because all of a sudden it's three good players and then a lot of guys on veteran minimum deals. So I think for the Lakers, I agree with you on this, that to assume just because we saw LeBron James and Anthony Davis be reasonably healthy last season, that shouldn't mean that they have to put all the pressure again on them, because where LeBron's at in his career, even if Anthony Davis has turned some sort of a corner with improving his health, with different change in his regimen, you never truly know if that actually means they can duplicate that. But I think where the Lakers are leaning on is that even though they're not great players, they're at least good enough players that if they can stay reasonably healthy, it would take less of the burden off of them compared to last season. And, JJ's talking about 9-man rotation that he wants, and he wants guys to have a defensive buy-in, can play within a system, doesn't make a lot of mistakes. They have those players I think Gabe Vincent's going to get that nod. Jared Vanderbilt when healthy, Max Christie, I think for sure. And then it just depends, maybe Jackson Hayes and even Dalton Connect because of his shooting potential. But you add that 9-man rotation up, even on their best days, still not enough because the rest of the Western Conference has gotten substantially better, and it's that much tougher.
Yeah, I agree with that part of it for sure. Speaking of teams that are at sort of a crossroads, the team the Lakers played last night is in one of those positions. The Phoenix Suns spent a lot of money last season, made a lot of big deals going into last season, and wound up right around where the Lakers were. First-round team, first-round exit, got wiped out in the first round of the playoffs. The Suns responded by saying, you know what, we're going to run this back. They add Tyus Jones. We'll talk about that. But they bring back Kevin Durant. They bring back Devin Booker. They bring back Bradley Beal. They change coaches after 1 year. Like, they fire Frank Vogel 1 year into what was, I think, a 4-year guaranteed contract, and bring in Mike Budenholzer, who, of course, has championship experience in Milwaukee. Your first look at the Suns last night, Mark, what did you think?
Well, I look at them through two things. One, the head coaching changes. I'm a fan of Frank Vogel. I'm a fan of Mike Budenholzer. But as we saw last season, their issues had to do with health and availability, and also the fact that they're not a great defensive team. Now, can Bradley Beal play more than 53 games? We'll see. Are they a good defensive team? Right now, no. I think that they got to obviously find a market for Nurkic, but we'll see on that front. But I think they definitely addressed one of the other major issues last season with getting Tyus Jones, where he's a traditional point guard, even though I never sensed that there was any chemistry issues or how they iron out roles with ball handling among Bradley Beal and Devin Booker. There was a lot of struggles, especially late in the games. Their turnovers, I think they ranked 24th in the league last season. I think they only ranked 25th in threes last season. Tyus Jones, even though he's known as the best backup point guard in the NBA, he can be a game changer in that front because he's been the king of assist to turnover ratio. And as a result of that, I think that you're going to see them play at a better pace. They're going to get the turnovers down. They're going to get more quality looks. I think from that lens, they're going to be a much more well-organized offensive machine. And the fact that they have Kevin Durant and Devin Booker and Bradley Beal on the team's really good too. But they still have a lot of question marks on defense.
Yes, to all those things. And look, I want to start with the defensive end. They were 13th in defensive efficiency last year, which I thought was a minor miracle to pull off. To be in the upper half of the NBA with that roster defensively, I thought was an accomplishment by Frank Vogel. I looked at the starting lineup for the Suns last night. They've got Tyus Jones playing with Devin Booker, playing with Bradley Beal, playing with Kevin Durant, and who's the starting five? I'm blanking now. It wasn't Nurkic,
Mason
obviously.
Plumlee.
Mason Plumlee. He'll be the backup when Nurkic comes back into play from injury. That's a team that's going to get exploited defensively. That is a really small team. You think about it, Jones is 6'1", 6'2", Booker, 6'5", Bradley Beal, I think, was he 6'3"? Was he introduced as that? I mean, that is a small three-man wing rotation. That means Kevin Durant is your full-time power forward playing opposite, Nurkic or Plumlee. I just think they're going to get killed defensively. I think that's going to be their biggest problem going into the season. I also wonder, Nurkic is the incumbent center, but when I talk to scouts about how Budenholzer's philosophies will blend in, they point straight at Nurkic and say that's a guy that is probably not going to be a good fit with Mike Budenholzer. Think about the bigs that Mike Budenholzer has had in his coaching career. In Atlanta, he had Al Horford. In Milwaukee, he had Brook Lopez. These are three-point shooting bigs, perimeter shooting bigs. Yusuf Nurkic is not that guy. He shot 25% from three last year on about 1.5 attempts per game. So unless that changes dramatically this year, I don't think he's going to be a Budenholzer type. Now Plumlee's not that guy either, but these bigs that the Suns have do not line up with the kind of bigs that Mike Budenholzer has historically succeeded with. So, look, I agree Tyus Jones solves a problem for them offensively. He is the natural playmaker they needed. I think he takes pressure off Booker. He takes pressure off Beal. But they might have to score 120 points per game to be in some of these ones, because I just think teams are going to score on them basically at will. And look, the bench, Grayson Allen, am I the only one that thought Grayson Allen looked huge in that game? He said he's up to about 230 pounds. He looked a step slow on both ends of the floor. He finished with 3 turnovers in 21 minutes. He just did not look good out there. So maybe he'll work himself into better conditioning as this preseason goes on. But that didn't look like good weight to me on Grayson Allen. He didn't look like a better version of the guy we've seen in years past. So they're a team, Mark, I have a lot of concerns about.
Yeah, that was surprising about Grayson Allen. I thought that he was going to, look in better shape. He had a really good season last season with shooting from three. He, I think, sent a really good message. He and Tyus Jones are former teammates at Duke. He sent the message, hey, don't worry. I'll gladly hand you my starting role to you. That meant a lot in the recruiting process. I asked the questions that we're talking about defensively to Tyus the other day, when you have these 3-guard lineups, how do you adjust to that against these bigger teams? And he conceded that reality, but he said, you know what, teams have to adjust to us too. And I don't entirely buy it. I buy it in the sense that their lane is going to be offense and gain a lot more shots, playing at a bigger pace, but they need to have defensive reinforcements. I think Mason Plumlee is a competent option, but it's got to be in a backup role. He has good length. He can defend bigs, but it's got to be limited minutes. He can't be the starting center on a consistent basis. And, nor is he expected to be. That's Nurkic. But besides from Nurkic's, I think, real qualities with screen setting and passing and getting some good putbacks, he doesn't offer anything else as far as what you're saying of having any sort of outside touch or either being a lockdown defender. He can be physical in the front court, but he's not going to be rotating pretty well.
And look, we talked about the offense that Budenholzer bigs have provided. Al Horford historically has been a high-level, multi-positional defender. Brook Lopez, under Mike Budenholzer, developed into a Defensive Player of the Year player. Is Nurkic going to develop into that? I doubt it. I don't think he has the skills. Now, might we see him launching more threes? Potentially. I could see that happening with Nurkic. But this is another team that they're in that 7 to 10 range. What were they last year? Somewhere in that range, that bottom half of the Western Conference playoff bracket. I don't see them improving that much. And they got a full season out of Kevin Durant. They got 40 games out of those three guys playing together. Now, maybe Booker doesn't have an injury issue like he had last year. Maybe Beal is healthier, but even still, I just think defensively they're going to get shredded. I do. I think that's going to be a season-long problem with Phoenix. Like I said, them being 13th in defensive efficiency last year, I thought that was almost a miracle. Like that they were able to get that high and be that good statistically defensively. This team, I think, took a step back defensively, maybe a step forward offensively. Maybe that'll be enough, and maybe Kevin Durant's greatness can mask some of that. But man, they're gonna have to score a whole bunch of points to win this year, and I don't know if I see it. Not against teams like Denver and Oklahoma City and Minnesota and Dallas, teams that are just elite at the top of the Western Conference. So
yeah,
we'll see.
And tie us up in a bow. I mean, obviously, it's going to be a huge development, for the better. Beal's health improves, but even if he doesn't, this partly explains why they got Tyus Jones. We have a reference point last season that Kevin Durant and Devin Booker basically played their best basketball and played the right way and played efficiently, and still wasn't enough. So I'm with you that even if they are this amazing dynamic offensive team and it addresses their turnovers issues and the number of shots and the pace, I don't think that they can become, the version of the Houston Rockets a decade ago where it's like, you know what, we're just going to go all in on gain a lot of attempts and whatever else. I think the underrated part of the Rockets teams that year when they challenged the Warriors in the West Finals, they're actually a pretty good defensive team, which is not something I usually associate with Mike D'Antoni. And right here in Phoenix, they just don't have that personnel now. I mean, Kevin Durant, he can elevate himself defensively when he puts his mind to it. He can. He's got that length. But I would say in KD's defense, like he's most valuable doing what he does best with just being an efficient scoring machine. So all of a sudden put this expectation on him. It's one thing to say, hey, be a good, willing team defender. But to ask him to become one of your main defensive specialists, I just don't think is fair to him. And I think it's also a misuse of what makes Kevin Durant so great.
No, I think they're a top 10 offensive team, and I think they're a bottom third defensive team. And teams like that don't win. Like you're lucky to make the play-in if you're statistically that type of team. Last thing I want to talk to you about, we saw Minnesota on Friday. Didn't get to see Julius Randle. He was not active for that game, but we did get to see a little bit of Dante DeVincenzo playing with the starters. And we saw Naz Reid playing with the starters. I got to tell you, that first 12 minutes, that first quarter where Chris Finch kind of burned out his starting lineup, they look pretty damn good. Right? Like Naz Reid, 6th man of the year last year, he looks perfectly ready, completely ready to step in and take on a starting role. Like his first shot was like an in-rhythm three-pointer, knocked it down. I saw the second Dalton Connect came into the game, Naz Reid posted him up and backed him down. And like he is playing or was playing in that game we saw with a lot of confidence. And I think having Towns out of the mix is going to create even more opportunity for him to shine playing opposite Rudy Gobert. DeVincenzo, one of the great three-point shooters last season, came in, knocked down 3 threes in his first game. Looked just like the guy we saw with the Knicks last year. And this was an area of weakness for the Timberwolves last season. They were bottom third in the NBA in three-point attempts. I was talking to Chris Finch about it before the game. Like he was saying, like this is an area we need to improve on to be successful. And here comes Dante DeVincenzo, who is kind of the answer to that problem, who can give you between 3 and 5 three-pointers made per game and be a real offensive asset to them. So I was among the people, and I kind of still am, that think the Timberwolves did not get better in the Karl-Anthony Towns deal. And we still haven't seen Julius Randle in this mix. But the fact that Naz Reid looks ready to take another step, and the fact that Dante DeVincenzo looks like a perfect fit in that backcourt rotation, which lost something when Kyle Anderson left, gives me a little more reason to be optimistic about the Wolves' end of this deal. What did you think?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to unpack with the Wolves. I talked with the GM this week about that deal, and they think, it's not like they're not going to be playoff contenders, but he was mentioning they took a competitive step back because of the fact that even though Julius Randle is a really good player, great playmaker, can have that kind of physical presence, and he is a very good team guy and very competitive. He's just an entirely different player than KAT as far as his three-point shooting abilities, the floor spacing that him and Rudy Gobert is. But I think that the
And he's not. Look, to be clear, Julius Randle is not a three-point shooter. He had the 1 year where he shot plus 40% from three. Since then, he's been, mid to low 30s, including low 30s during his time last season.
Yeah. And the other thing, I think Chris Finch basically acknowledged this to us when he was talking with us before the game. He said and after the game, that he anticipates that this is going to be a pretty significant learning curve. But I think where the Wolves are optimistic are on a few fronts here. Anthony Edwards is on the team. He's kind of good. They feel like he's going to take his game to an even bigger level because he's still a young player. There were some learning lessons from, the playoff exit against Dallas where he himself acknowledged, hey, I got to learn how to train better. I ran out of gas. It wasn't, him being negligent. It's more of knowing tactically what to do to last through the course of a season. And then I think the Team USA gold medal run also had a carryover effect. So Chris Finch was saying, look, training camp so far, he is in the shape that we want him to be in. He's doing all the right nutritious things. And he has prepared himself to be ready for this role, as well as what you were mentioning, some of the other guys with Naz Reid, Jaden McDaniels, Mike Conley. Those are all three players that Chris Finch has singled out as guys that are going to have increased roles. And they have a reference point with that. When Karl-Anthony Towns was out with his injury last season, they had to have this attitude of holding the fort down. Now, obviously, much different context because now they're going to have to see how they can expedite the chemistry with Julius Randle and Rudy Gobert. But I think the good and promising thing, even though there's going to be inevitable tactical adjustments on how Julius Randle and Rudy Gobert play on the floor with each other, my sense talking to them after shoot around is that there's a lot of enthusiasm and a want to be a team player with all this. So I think with that, it's going to be a challenge. I don't pin them as the favorites in the West, but I think that they are in that conversation. But if I had to personally rank it, I would put Oklahoma City ahead of them, Denver ahead of them, and probably them in Dallas. You could make a case as third or fourth.
I think the biggest question now is, do you start Julius Randle? Because clearly there's a comfortability between Naz Reid and Rudy Gobert. They've played together for multiple years now. Naz knows what it means to play off of Rudy, and he is a more reliable three-point shooter than Julius Randle is. But if you bring Randle off the bench, how much of a problem does that create with Randle being unhappy, Randle in what is effectively a contract year? How much balance is there? Like, if you were just mixing and matching lineups, Mark, I think it's a no-brainer to start Gobert, Randle, Jaden McDaniels. That makes sense. Gobert, Naz, and Jaden McDaniels. Because you can bring Randle off the bench, play multiple positions, play a little bit of 5, a little bit of 4, whole bunch of different things. But I'm sure Julius is coming into this situation saying, I'm going to start, I'm going to average 25, I'm going to get you 10 rebounds. At the end of this year, you're going to give me a 4-year contract extension on top of the option year. That may not be what's best for Minnesota. What's best for Minnesota probably is playing Naz Reid in that starting spot. So I think that's something that Chris Finch is going to have to balance. Because I asked him about this after the game the other night, where I said, is Julius kind of a plug-and-play guy with the KAT stuff? And he's like, no, he's not. Like, there's different things we have to do with Julius. I think Naz is a lot more plug-and-play when it comes to the stuff that Karl-Anthony Towns can do. And I think Naz is only going to get better. I think Jaden McDaniels is only going to get better. I thought McDaniels kind of took a step back last year. Like, he didn't become more of a playmaker. His three-point numbers dipped. He's still a really good defender, but he didn't evolve offensively. And, Chris kind of alluded to that during the conversation you and I were there for after the game. Like, he thinks there's more coming from Jaden McDaniels. So if you get a little bit more from him offensively, you get the versatility that Naz Reid offers offensively. I just think it makes a lot of sense. But do you think this team can survive? Do you think the locker room can survive with Julius Randle coming off the bench?
Yeah, I don't think so. Julius Randle talked about, hey, he's an adaptable player at this stage of his career. He just wants to win. I think.
But would you agree? Would you agree that his best role with this team is coming off the bench?
I think from a chemistry standpoint, yes. I think the other concern that I've thought about, and some people around the league have brought up, is how he and Ant play together. I mean, I think that they seem to be getting along well. They're attracted to each other's personalities and competitiveness, but from a tactical X's and O's standpoint, there are some concerns about the spacing.
Yeah.
Because even though Julius is a great playmaker, to what you're saying, he's not a 3-point threat. Even though he's been expanding his game is driving to the rim and using power and using his playmaking to create some offense. And he's not even really that much of a post-up player either. But I think to what your point, there are some locker room delicacies with that, especially contract years. So I think what will happen is that he'll start because of who he is. It's also the idea of just gain as much on-court reps as you can, and then just stagger rotations. I mean, that's usually the way coaches do those things anyway, where, Naz Reid, he'll come off the bench, do his normal role, and then they'll stagger accordingly late in the game. Now, as you know, Chris, with how the NBA is, there's also focus on closing lineups. And usually that is the first adjustment that teams make before adjusting the starting lineup. And so that's another, I think, interesting thing to see how this plays out.
I mean, look, it's so early, and we haven't, as we record this, seen Julius Randle in a Minnesota uniform on the court. But I can't get to a point where I think that the front court rotation for Minnesota in the closing minutes should be anything but Rudy, Naz, and McDaniels. Now, maybe you pull Rudy out of that mix and give yourself a little more versatility at the 5 against smaller teams with Randall, Naz, and McDaniels. But in any of these scenarios, Mark, it's Naz and McDaniels in that lineup. I just can't get to a place where I see a closing lineup for Minnesota being better with Julius Randle as part of it instead of Naz Reid. So that's the challenge for Chris Finch. And that's maybe why he was talking to us about the learning curve that's going to be there, because he's got to figure out who plays well with who and what these kind of end of game rotations are going to look like. But I'll say this again, to bring it full circle. I was more encouraged by Minnesota's ability to come out of that deal looking as good or better than what they were before after watching that game and seeing Dante fit in with that starting lineup, seeing, and Dante will probably come off the bench when Anthony Edwards comes back, but seeing Naz fit into that starting lineup. Like, I just think they've now got a solid starting lineup, really good depth. I saw a lot of people bullish on Luke Garza. I was a little less bullish on that. I thought he was fine. Like, I don't know what you're going to do if Luke Garza is playing big minutes for you, but I think that increases the depth of this team. So I like Minnesota. I like what they're offering. I'm a fan, and I'm looking forward to seeing how they kind of figure it out during the season. Any final thoughts on the Timberwolves?
Well, I think the two things I'll add that's going to be interesting. I mean, one, Julius Randle and Ant didn't play against the Lakers. Chris Finch made it clear he expects Randle and Ant to play when they play Philadelphia on Friday, so we'll get an early look with that. The other thing I'm fascinated here is, Rudy Gobert, understandably so, is saying, hey, our goal is to be top defensive team again. And you think even for whatever attention, positive or negative, that Rudy gets with his DPOY awards, he is a great rim protector. But I am curious how that whole defensive dynamic is going to be when it comes to crunch time and rotations, because we saw in Dallas that that became a source of a lot of content for us to unpack.
Yeah, but I mean, Rudy had a visible bad moment against Luka at the end of game, 3 was it? I think.
Yeah.
That, but overall, he's a plus defenseman. The numbers back that up. He is a net positive. 100%. And look, we don't have to relitigate that moment, but that was as much on, I think, McDaniels there, not force or try to get away from the switch, and it was on Rudy taking the switch. There's nothing Rudy could do in a situation like that, and quite frankly, there's nothing 99% of the bigs in today's NBA could do. When you're facing down Luka Doncic in that particular situation, he's going to put every one of you on ice skates. But it's going to be fun, man. The Western Conference is the most interesting conference in the NBA once again, and it's going to be competitive, I think, from start to finish. All right, check out Mark's stuff over at Sportskeeda, the Sporting Tribune. Listen to him on Fox Sports Radio. Mark, always great to catch up, man. Thanks for joining me.
Always a pleasure, Chris.